All right, so yesterday we had done part of this lesson, but not the entire thing. So this is the end of lesson 7 about your intestines. We did small intestine yesterday. So today we're going to talk about your large intestine just for a couple of minutes. It won't take long. And then we'll move on with lesson 8. The first thing you need to recognize about your large intestine, and I drew one yesterday, I told you it looked like someone's hair, basically, is that there are 3, let's call them main segments. There's actually a bunch of little structures that we could name, but the 3 main segments are what we would call the ascending colon. And it's called the ascending colon because of the direction in which food is moving through it. So food comes in from the ileum. The ileum is the end of the small intestine. It enters, so we're kind of down at the bottom, and then food is going to move upwards. So you have the ascending colon, then you have the transverse colon, which is that part in the top and the middle. So food is going across. And then you have the descending colon, where food and undigested products are moving downwards. Those are the 3 main segments. Now, because of the direction that food is moving through them, I'd like to remind you, even though I said it before, peristalsis happens throughout the length of your digestive tract. So it's not only happening in your esophagus, that's just the first place that we encounter it. But as you are not physically, consciously being like, okay, food, go from my stomach to my small intestine. Okay, food, go into my large intestine. There are muscles, involuntary smooth muscles, that are constantly performing peristalsis to push your food along. It would be especially important in somewhere like your ascending colon. Remember that food is getting pushed. It's not moving because of gravity. If there were no peristalsis, stuff would not move from the bottom upwards. So we need that rhythmic contraction of muscles to keep things moving along. Now those are the 3 main segments of the large intestine. There are some other structures that are part of the large intestine that I'd like to mention. First, the rectum, which is the end, or it's sort of after the large intestine. It's really hard to distinguish sometimes where one structure begins and the next structure ends when you're talking about one continuous tube. So the rectum is at the end of the large intestine, and it is really for storage. That is where undigested waste is stored until your body is ready to egest it. The rectum leads to the anus, and that is where egestion is actually accomplished. So at the end here would be the anus, and that is another valve. It's another set of muscles. This one you actually have a little bit of control over. So there are some muscles, especially ones involved with getting rid of waste, that you can control to some degree. Now, you would not be able to control this muscle indefinitely. At some point, your digestive system's automatic functions would take over, and if you were not letting waste leave your body, it would come out of its own accord. Same thing would happen with urine. So you can control those muscles to a point. The other valve that I'd like to mention is the ileocacal valve. You'll see right here where it is. It's right between the ileum and the beginning of the large intestine. So every time we have a new structure starting, very typically there is a valve that controls whether or not food and food product is going to enter that structure. So the ileocacal valve is between the ileum, which is the end of your small intestine, and the cecum, which is the beginning of your large intestine. So that's my next point. Here's your cecum. It's the pouch at the beginning of your large intestine. And I'm only mentioning that word so that you can see where we're getting ileocacal valve from. It's naming the two things that it's attaching. Now the last thing that I want to mention here is your appendix. And on most pictures, the appendix is quite a sad little structure. It's this wee baby dangling thing right here. You'll see it's called the mesoappendix in some cases because the appendix really does not have a digestive function in humans. So as far as we know, your appendix is doing basically 0 things for digestion for you. Normally, your appendix is very, very small, and it dangles right off the beginning of the large intestine, like you see in this picture. If your appendix gets infected, that's when it can become quite large and cause you some discomfort. Appendicitis is something you may have heard of. Appendicitis would be when there is inflammation or infection of your appendix. And I'm mentioning this so I can mention itis. When you see itis at the end of a word, biologically speaking, we mean that it is infected or inflamed. So I could take the name of any structure and put itis at the end, and I'm telling you that it's infected. So gastritis would be an infected stomach. Meningitis would be infected meninges, which are the tissue that surrounds your brain. You could have an itis in basically anything. Now this is a little bit about the anatomy of your large intestine. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask about any of the anatomical words? So we still haven't really said what it is that your large intestine is supposed to be doing. And so that will be the next point. What does your large intestine do? Your large intestine is not involved with either physical or chemical digestion. We said when we talked about the small intestine that it is completing digestion. Digestion is over in the small intestine. So what is the major purpose of the large intestine? To reabsorb water. For example, water that came from your saliva. Water that was part of the food that you ate, or water that you drank. But we're calling it reabsorb because a lot of the water that's mixed with your food, you didn't consume with your food. It was already in your body, and saliva was produced, and that's where you got the water from. So that's why we're saying reabsorb instead of just absorb, because we're saying that water was probably already somewhere in your body. We're just taking it back. So the major purpose is to reabsorb water from the waste material. And we want water to go back in the blood. Your body does not want to give away water if it can at all do that. Same thing with glucose. Your body does not want to give up glucose. Now, what makes your large intestine work properly? Fiber. Fiber is undigestible, usually plant material. Most of the time it's cellulose, so that's a large carbohydrate that plant cell walls are made out of. We don't have enzymes to digest cellulose compared to, say, a cow, who most certainly does. But fiber, this undigestible portion of plant material we can't digest, helps hold on to water. And the reason that you need fiber, even though your body doesn't want to get rid of water, you have to let some water go. If there were no water in your waste, your feces would be hard as a rock. It would be dry, solid, very difficult to move, and very painful to ingest. So if you have a low fiber diet, you would get constipation. So that you know, the sort of opposite of this would be diarrhea. Diarrhea is when you have too much water in the feces, and it can be caused by a number of reasons. It doesn't have to be that you consumed a lot of fiber. I mentioned in an earlier lesson, my brother had a condition with his pyloric valve that caused him to have diarrhea because food was coming too fast and your body didn't have time to digest everything. Now, what else is there in your large intestine? A ton of bacteria. Normally, you would think, ooh, bacteria, gross, that sounds bad. Bacteria are good. You need to have bacteria in your digestive tract. If you have ever heard of probiotics, that is a thing that people are concerned with a lot. You find them in yogurt, or you can take vitamins that have them in it. But the idea with a probiotic is they have active bacterial cultures that are healthy for your digestive tract. So without bacteria, your digestive tract is not functioning properly. A lot of times, if you're going to take an antibiotic because you have had a surgery or you have had some sort of infection, antibiotics don't know which bacteria to kill, hey? They'll kill all bacteria. And so I know I had to take some pretty strong antibiotics when I had my tonsils taken out, and it was highly recommended to me to eat yogurt and take probiotics to replenish my natural, healthy bacteria in my digestive tract. Now, what do these bacteria do? They can potentially make some vitamins. Vitamin K would be an example out of that. So your large intestine's major purpose is to reabsorb water. Fiber is necessary to make sure that there's still enough water left in your waste so that you can ingest it. And there are tons of bacteria there. Bacteria produce gas as a byproduct, so this would be the source of some of the gas that leaves your digestive system. Now next week, I have a couple of good articles for us to read. One's about constipation, one is about farting, because generally this is where people have questions about farting. You fart lots, hey? You just don't always notice that it's happening because it doesn't always make a sound. But since your digestive system is basically an open tube, it's open from your mouth and it's open at the end of the digestive tract, gas is always escaping there, like all the time. You just don't notice it all the time. Now, does anyone have any questions they want to ask about the large intestine? So this is lesson 8. We have finished now with the digestive tract. We've talked about the pieces where food is actually entering. Now we're moving on to the accessory organs, and I'd just like to remind you that food does not enter in your accessory organs. Now, this doesn't mean that your accessory organs never get glucose. I'm saying that the food that you ingest is not passing through these. Once food has been digested and it enters your bloodstream, then it can go anywhere. But the digestive tract does not lead to one of these organs. First, we will talk about your pancreas. Your pancreas does 2 really important things. The first thing that it does is that it regulates blood sugar. And I wrote the word homeostasis here because this is an excellent example of how your digestive system plays a role in homeostasis. Homeostasis is the constant internal conditions that your body is trying to maintain. And so your pancreas helps with that. Your pancreas also produces enzymes and a buffer. So these two things are really quite different. Regulating blood sugar is what happens when your pancreas is functioning as an endocrine gland. Producing enzymes and a buffer is what happens when your pancreas is functioning as an exocrine gland. And perhaps you're like, what do those words mean? I've never heard them in my life. And I will discuss what they mean. So this page sums up what's happening in your pancreas so that you know your pancreas is usually sort of behind and below your stomach. Sometimes on diagrams we'll show it as completely below your stomach so that you can actually see it. But anatomically speaking, a portion of the pancreas would sort of be in behind your stomach. There is a duct that runs down the middle of your pancreas. And this duct leads to the duodenum. So, when your pancreas is making things that need to mix with your food, it's got a duct that runs down the length of it that is attached to your duodenum. It's attached to some other stuff too, but we'll get there when we talk about the next organ. So that you know, a duct is not something that contains blood. Blood is in a blood vessel, like a vein or an artery. A duct is another tube-like structure that allows other types of fluid to move, in this case, digestive enzymes. And so, as a brief intro, endocrine things have to do with blood. Exocrine glands have to do with ducts. And if you're going to take Bio20E, either second semester this year or sometime next year, you will learn a lot about endocrine glands. There's an entire chapter just about this. Endocrine glands are things that produce hormones. Exocrine glands are things that are attached to ducts. These are usually where we're getting enzymes from. So if I had to really quickly sum up the difference between those two words, I'm saying that your pancreas can make hormones that go in your blood and enzymes that go in a duct. So it does two very different things. Now up till there, does anybody have any questions about any of the vocab that's up there? Homeostasis. Just saying. Just saying. It's going to be on the quest. Faux show. So, we will talk first about the endocrine function of your pancreas. Endocrine glands, like I already said, produce hormones that go into your blood. So what are the hormones that your pancreas is producing? Well, perhaps you have heard about some of the things that come from your pancreas before. If I were to take a section of the pancreas, so you'll see it's the same picture from before, we've circled a little piece and we're showing that we're blowing it up. There are these tiny little clusters of cells that kind of look like an island floating around in a sea of other cells. They're called islets of Langerhans. It's very fancy. That is where the hormones are being produced. So there needs to be blood vessels nearby so that these hormones can get into the blood. There are two types of cells in these little islets. There are beta cells and there are alpha cells. Now visually, I would not ask you to distinguish them, but I would maybe ask you to know which one produces which hormone. Beta cells are the ones that produce insulin. So even though alpha technically comes before beta, I'm mentioning beta first because insulin is usually the thing that people are familiar with. When blood sugar increases, your body produces insulin, specifically the beta cells in your pancreas. Now, what are the results of having insulin in your body? In muscle tissue and in your liver, and really, as sort of a general rule, there is increased permeability to glucose. That means your cells will be alerted, hey guys, there's a ton of glucose. Why don't you absorb some of it? So insulin helps your cells become permeable. That means they let glucose in. The other thing that happens in your muscles and in your liver is that there is increased conversion of glucose to glycogen. Glycogen is the storage form of glucose. And glycogen is produced both in your liver and in your muscles. So when insulin is produced, those are the responses that happen in your body. The other hormone that is produced comes from alpha cells, and it is called glucagon. Now, in the word glucagon, you see gluc and you see gon. So when I look at this word, glucagon, this is what is produced when glucose is gone. It's a very nice name. Unusual, hey, that we've named something based on what it actually is doing. So glucagon is produced when glucose is gone, and it has essentially the opposite effect of insulin. So it reduces permeability to glucose, and it reduces the conversion to glycogen. In fact, it usually reverses the conversion. Glucagon's job is to make sure there is more sugar in your blood, not sugar being absorbed into your cells. So like I said, this is an excellent example of homeostasis. So there's lots of things that you could talk about here with reference to that. Anyone have questions they want to ask about homeostasis, pancreas, insulin, glucagon? All right, so this is the endocrine function of your pancreas. So this is hormones that are being made. They go through your blood. So that you know, the fact that a hormone has to get produced and travel through your blood means immediately that this is a little bit of a slower action than just pumping out some substance that's going to touch your food right away. So for a hormone to take action, it takes a little while for it to get to your blood, for your blood to circulate, and for your cells to respond. Now your pancreas does other things. It also functions as an exocrine gland. So if we look at endo versus exo, endo sounds like inside, exo sounds like outside. And if you refer that to your blood, that can be the distinction. Endocrine glands put things into the blood. Exocrine glands put things outside of blood vessels, somewhere else. But they produce fluids not anything to do with blood, released into tubes, not blood vessels, that travel to another body region. So I hope you can see I'm really emphasizing this is not blood vessels. You have plenty of other ducts and tubes that connect your organs besides blood vessels. And exocrine glands are not releasing their fluids into blood vessels. Now the fluids very often involve enzymes that are going to help break something down. And we're going to focus on the enzymes because we're talking about digestion. Here are the enzymes that are produced in your pancreas. Amylase. We saw this word before, but in your saliva. Salivary amylase broke down carbohydrates. Pancreatic amylase does the same thing. So pancreatic amylase continues to break down carbohydrates. We've actually seen a bunch of enzymes that work on carbohydrates. Amylase in your mouth, maltase, sucrase, and lactase in your small intestine, and then this second version of amylase. Usually this version of amylase is breaking things down to glucose, whereas salivary amylase is usually breaking polysaccharides into smaller sugars, but not necessarily glucose right away. The second thing that is produced in your pancreas is trypsin. Trypsin, even though it doesn't end with ASE, is still an enzyme. And this breaks down peptides, so protein molecules. And they would be broken down into amino acids eventually. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is that we have enzymes for the same thing in two different places. One of the things that I like to mention when I mention trypsin is pH. Pepsin works best in your stomach because the pH is low, and pepsin likes low pH. Trypsin works best in your intestines because it works better at a higher pH. The next thing that comes from your pancreas is lipase. You had some of that in your stomach as well. And so same thing would be true. Your stomach has a low pH, your intestines have a higher pH. This breaks down fat. So what do I get from fat or from lipids? I would get glycerol and fatty acids, because those are the building blocks of a lipid. And then lastly, there is nuclease. Now, we haven't put a big focus on nucleic acids, but that is their function. This is the enzyme that breaks down nucleic acids. Those are the things that make up your DNA. So if you take a look, the pancreas produces an enzyme for each type of macromolecule. One for carbs, one for proteins, one for fats, one even for nucleic acids. Now, where do these enzymes go? This is important. They go into the pancreatic duct. That duct, which runs down the middle of the pancreas, is attached to the common bile duct which empties into the duodenum, the first segment of your small intestine. So food does not go in your pancreas, but your pancreas produces substance that meet up with your food in the first segment of your small intestine. Now your pancreas, like I said on the first page, produces a buffer. The buffer is sodium bicarbonate. If you are at all chemically inclined, you might be aware that that is what baking soda is. What would be the function of this? To neutralize stomach acid. Your intestines are not designed to have really strong acid inside of them. They do not have a really thick protective layer of mucus because absorption has to happen in your small intestine. So we can't have acid kicking around, deteriorating the lining of your small intestine. So this is the exocrine function of your pancreas. Fluids full of enzymes are secreted into the pancreatic duct, which is connected to the common bile duct, which eventually leads to the duodenum. Substance. So the pancreas is one accessory organ. The liver is the other one that we'll discuss, sort of in combination with your gallbladder. Now, one of the things that I'll mention right away is that your liver and your gallbladder anatomically are attached to each other. In fact, on the picture that I gave you on the first day, I said you had to add the gallbladder because it's actually in behind the liver. On this picture here, your liver would sort of be right here, covering up the gallbladder, and your liver is a really large organ. It has lots of blood vessels in it. And your liver does a ton of stuff. But the main digestive function of your liver is to produce something called bile. Now bile, you might remember in the first video I showed you, it was sort of like a nice neon green color, very beautiful, came squirting out like a fountain. It's quite pretty. But that is the main digestive function of your liver. Your liver produces the bile. And I'm highlighting the word produce because your gallbladder does something slightly different with it. Now, what is bile? Bile is not an enzyme. It often gets categorized with enzymes because it's a digestive fluid, but it is not an enzyme. It is not for chemical digestion. It is for physical breakdown of fat and oil into smaller droplets. The name for that process is emulsification. If you've ever seen what dish soap does to grease, that is emulsification. So that's what bile is doing. It's not actually chemically breaking down fat, but it's making it into smaller pieces. Absolutely. When you throw up and it's kind of a gross color, it is very likely bile that you are looking at. It probably doesn't smell very good. It doesn't look very nice. Now, bile is produced in the liver, but stored in your gallbladder. That would be why you could survive without a gallbladder. Because the gallbladder isn't actually making the bile, it's storing it. So how does the bile get from your liver to your gallbladder? There are things called hepatic ducts. If you see HEPA, it means liver. So hepatitis is an inflammation of your liver. A hepatic duct duct is the duct attached to your liver. Your hepatic artery is the artery attached to your liver. Hepa is the prefix that means liver. So there are some ducts attached to your liver. There's also a duct attached to your gallbladder. So right up here, you can see the connection. Substances could move between your liver and your gallbladder. So the bile can be produced in your liver, move to your gallbladder. When your gallbladder then is stimulated, and I'm just going to highlight that word because in our next lesson we'll talk about what would stimulate your gallbladder to do this. It releases bile into the common bile duct. The common bile duct comes all the way down here, and you can see that the pancreatic duct meets up with it. And that is what is going into your duodenum. If your gallbladder gets removed, you will not die. People have this surgery done all the time for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because they're getting gallstones. But if your gallbladder is removed, it means that you have reduced ability to digest fats. It's not that it's impossible, but you don't have bile stored up. Your body will only give you the bile that your liver is currently making. There's nowhere to store it and keep it for future use. If you have your gallbladder taken out, then you have to be careful about how much fat you consume at one time, because too much fat would result in intestinal issues, because now your body cannot produce enough bile fast enough to meet your needs. So you can survive without a gallbladder. It just means you have to be more careful with the amount of fat that you're consuming. Does anyone else have questions they want to ask here? All right, last thing. These are other functions of your liver. And the reason I'm mentioning them now is because your liver is one of the organs that sort of links a bunch of your systems together, kind of like how muscles are part of all of the systems. Your liver is part of a lot of them as well. It detoxifies your blood. So when we talk about circulation, your liver plays a huge role in that. Not just because of this, but also it breaks down dead red blood cells and excess amino acids. And that's how urine is made. So your liver plays a big role in that. It is involved in the regulation of blood sugar, which we already mentioned. It responds to insulin and glucagon. And like we already wrote down, they tell your liver to either convert glucose to glycogen for storage or convert glycogen to glucose because now we don't have enough blood sugar. It does some other things. It helps your blood clot so that you don't bleed to death. And it plays a role with calcium uptake, which we know for muscles is important for contraction. And then there are a number of other things that calcium is used for as well.